French King Louis XVI was putting heavy taxes on the poor and not on the rich. 100 years prior to the Revolution, nobles left their country homes for the court in Paris, Versailles, and Fontainebleau. Nobles used their power to lay heavy conditions on their tenants. The tenants were farmers who had to pay the rent by coin, kind, or labor. Nobles could make a corvée, which is forced labor to make or repair roads. If peasants didn't pay or perform a task, heavy fines were put upon them. Peasants and farmers were tired of being mistreated. They would let their fields and pastures become overgrown so it returned to how it once was. Some men of France warned nobles that peasants would cause trouble. There be certain savages and shy wild animals, female and male, which are scattered up and down our countryside. They are sunburned to a sort of devil black, and walk bent towards the earth they dig. On straightening themselves, they show, it is true, and in fact they are men and women. They withdraw from the fields at nightfall to their dens, where they sup up black bread, roots, and water. They spare their fellow man, the laborers, of seed time and harvest, and do not deserve to lack the bread they sow. France had gaiety in the rich and misery in the masses. There are three main phases to the French Revolution. The first phase. Harvest had failed and starvation stalks France. The peasantries are in open and continuing revolt across the country. It started from June to July of 1788 with the insurrection of Grenoble. The insurrection of Grenoble was the day of, also known as the Day of Tiles. It took place in the town of Grenoble on June 7, 1788. This was one of the first revolts to precede the French Revolution, and it was thought to be the start. Grenoble had been a common place for unrest due to financial hardship from the economic and financial crisis. It was sparked by the attempts of Cardinal Etienne Charles de Lomaine de Brienne, the Archbishop of Toulouse and the Controller General of Louis XVI. He was there to abolish Parliament to deal with France's public debt. Shortly prior to the insurrection of Grenoble, a large meeting was called in Grenoble to call together old estates of the province of Dauphine. The government responded by sending troops to stop this movement. The troops were then forced the people off the streets, but the townspeople then proceeded to climb onto roofs around the Jesuit college and showered the troops with shingles. This resulted in the first outbreak of political violence. The commander of the troops was so alarmed by these actions that he allowed the meeting to proceed. They then met on July 21st, 1788 in Versailles, known as the Assembly of Versailles. On August 8, 1788, Louis XVI convokes États Généraux on suggestion of former Finance Minister Jacques Necker to hear grievances. The tiers état was also known as the Third Estate, and on June 23, 1789, the king rejected the resolution of the Third Estate. The Third Estate is also known as the Common People of France, the Common People of France wrote a political pamphlet written by Abbé Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès. It was a response to Finance Minister Jacques Necker's invitation for writers to state how they felt the Estates General should be organized. It was a complete nation did not need clergy and aristocracy. People wanted a genuine representation in the Estates General, so they wanted equal representation. They wanted votes taken by her head, not by orders. And they wanted taxes and government policy should affect all portions of society equally. Less taxes on the poor and more on the nobles. Friend of the People was written by Jean-Paul Marat in 1789. It was written in September for the Third Estate. Jean-Paul Marat also wrote Offering to the Nation, What is the Third Estate, the Constitution, and Tableau of the Flows of the English Constitution. He originally called publicist Parisian. He attacked influential groups in Paris, including the Corps Municipal, the Constituent Assembly, the ministers, and the Corps de Châtelet. He was forced to flee to London in January of 1790 when he campaigned against the Marquis de Lafayette. There he wrote the Denunciation of Jacques Necker. He eventually went into hiding in the Paris sewers, but he still made regular attacks on conservative revolutionary leaders. On July 14, 1789, armed citizens storm and capture the Bastille, also known as storming of the Bastille. It happened in Paris, which was, and the Bastille was, the storming of Bastille happened in Paris. It was a medieval fortress and prison represented royal authority, but it only had 7 inmates. The storming was a symbol of the abuses of the monarchy, and the commoners formed a national guard. The commoners used the colors red, white, and blue. Red and blue stood for the Paris Commune, and the white for the cockade of the king. It became a symbol of the revolution and later of France itself. Earlier, they had stormed the Hôtel des Invalides to gather arms. Later, the crowd gathered in the morning, calling for a surrender of the prisoners and removal of the guns and the release of arms and gunpowder. Around 1 p.m., the crowd stormed the outer courtyard, where gunfire began. The governor fired a cannon into the crowd, turning it into a mob. The Governor de Lancey ordered a ceasefire at 5 p.m. He sent out a letter, but his demands were refused. He knew he couldn't win, so he opened the gates to the inner courtyard. Delaunay was seized and brought to Hôtel des Invalides. At one point, he was kicked by a man in the groins, which caused him to be stabbed repeatedly. They then sawed off his head, put it on a pike, and carried it through the streets. Only Salih Samad from Invalides survived. All of the others were killed.
The Great Fear happened from July 17th to August 3rd in 1789. Peasants were rebelling, and it caused a general panic known as the Great Fear. They were attacking manor houses, and it was rumored that foreign forces were burning crops and fields, and bandits were burning down buildings. There was a fear of peasant revolts, and the deciding factor was to abolish feudalism. Give us liberty, give us bread, give us what we want if you value your head. Feudalism was abolished in 1789. Feudalism is the dominant social system in the medieval empire in which the nobility hold land from the crown in exchange for military services, and then the vassals were in turn tenants of the land, while the peasants were obligated to live on their lord's land and give him labor and a share of the food they farmed so that they could live on the land and have military protection from thieves and other things. Less than a month after the storming of Bastille on October 6, 1789, the king abolished feudalism, and France's National Assembly held a meeting where that happened. And then there was the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, which was a manifesto of principles inspired by the French Revolution. The Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizens happened on August 26, 1789. It was fundamental to the revolution and the history of human rights. It defined the individual and collective rights of all the estates of the realm and the universe. There were 3 estates: the clergy, the nobles, and the commoners. And that was the social hierarchy, and it was influenced by the doctrine of natural right, and it became the basis for a nation of free individuals protected equally by the law. It was inspired by the American Revolution. It had a major impact on liberty and democracy in Europe and worldwide, and it was drawn up by Lafayette, who worked closely with Thomas Jefferson. And then Henri Mirabeau had a central role in conceptualizing and drafting. Flight to Varney. On the night of the 20th of June in 1791, Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette attempted to flee from Paris. They were unsuccessful. They wanted to get to Austria, where Marie was born, and they hoped to find safety in their new French-Austrian government. They made it to Varney, where they were arrested, and that was the turning point of hatred to the French monarchy. Their escape ultimately led to Louis XVI to be charged of treason and later executed in 1793. For their escape, they took on roles. They were the Marquise de Choiseul, which was a Russian baroness, and the Queen and King's sister were her maids, and then the king was her butler, and the royal children were her daughters. That was planned by the Count Axel von Fersen and the Baron de Brutal, and the royal family was recognized by their postmaster in Santee, which led to their arrest in Varnay.
His work was from the May of 1790 to his death in April 1791. The king paid him to draw up state papers, and some historians say he was a traitor, but others not because he stuck to his beliefs. His work was from the May of 1790 to his death in April 1791. The king paid him to draw up state papers, and some historians say he was a traitor, but others not because he stuck to his beliefs. In 1709, he contracted pericarditis, which is an inflammation of the tissue around the heart. This killed him, but some believe that he was poisoned. He also played a role in the Declaration of Pillnitz, which is a statement issued on August 27, 1791 by the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold II and Frederick William II of Prussia. It was written at the Pillnitz Castle near Dresden, Saxony. Towards the beginning of the Revolution, there was a massacre, the Champ de Mars massacre. It occurred on July 17 of 1791. It was the National Constituent Assembly decreed that King Louis XVI would remain king under constitutional monarchy. Later that day, Republicans of France rolled against decision, and Jacques-Pierre Brissot wrote a petition demanding the king to be removed. A large crowd gathered to sign the petition, and the Marquis de Lafayette and the National Guard dispersed the crowd. The crowd came back and was led by Danton and Camille Desmoulins, an even bigger crowd. Up to 50 people were killed by the National Guard firing into the crowd. This was considered the turning point of the revolution. The Champ de Mars massacre consisted of two sides. The first side was supporters of the king and with close accountability to the assembly. The second side was the monarchy to be disposed and be replaced with a republic. Anyone who helped write the petition was accused of conspiracy, and the Democratic newspaper was suspended. The Cordeliers Club suspended a session from 1790 to prevent the abuse of power, and leadership under Jean-Paul Marat. This eventually fell apart in 1794 when Herbert and a few others were arrested and killed. The felons, now masters of France, they sought to preserve the position of the king and supported the proposed plan of the National Assembly for a constitutional monarchy. The Jacobins split between moderate and the radicals, which were the Jacobins, who wanted to overthrow Louis.
Frenchmen who were mostly aristocratic that fled France in the years following 1789 were called émigrés. Many plotted against the revolutionary government and sought to restore the old regime. The revolutionary leaders feared the émigrés. Émigrés who did not return by January 1792 were liable to death as traitors. Their property was confiscated by the state, and Comité de Province set up a court in Koblenz in the Rhineland of Germany. And Louis Joseph, Prince of Condé, commanded an army of émigrés. They were defeated at Quiberon Bay in July of 1795 in an attempt to aid a peasant revolt, and over 600 émigrés were executed. Many took refuge in England, and then in 1802, Napoleon Bonaparte granted the majority of émigrés amnesty, so many returned back to France. After the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy in 1814, the émigrés played significant roles in politics. Their petitioning resulted in the law of indemnity in 1825, and they reimbursed those who had lost land. The Declaration of Pigny in August 27th of 1791. They declared joint support of the Holy Roman Empire and Prussia for King Louis XVI against the French Revolution. It was intended to be a warning to the French revolutionaries, and it stated that Austria would go to war if only for all other European powers also went to war with France. Leopold didn't want to go to war, and he knew William Pitt, which was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, would not go to war, so he wouldn't have to. And the National Assembly interpreted the declaration to say Austria was going to declare war, and they used this to gain momentum to eventually declare war.
first was reactionaries, and the monarchy wanted war, though the new government would they thought that the new government would easily be defeated. In this way, the monarchy would be restored. Then there was the other side, the revolutionaries. They thought war would unify France. This would also spread revolutionary ideas across Europe. On April 20, 1792, the Legislative Assembly declared war on Austria. The Legislative Assembly was a one-year period from October 1st, 1791 to September 1792. The Legislative Assembly governed France and was operated under the French Constitution of 1791, between the National Constituent Assembly and the National Convention. The French Constitution of 1791 was created after the collapse of the absolute monarchy of the Ancien regime, and this was to establish the popular sovereignty. The Brunswick Manifesto was a proclamation issued by Charles William Ferdinand on August 1st, 1792, to Paris. It threatened that if the royal French family were harmed, then the French civilians would be harmed. This was meant to intimidate, but it actually spurred on the revolutionaries. It led to a war between revolutionary France and the counter-revolutionary monarchies. The war in Vendée was on August 22nd, 1792. It looked like peasant riots at first, but then it showed the counter-revolutionary themes. Tens of thousands of civilians were massacred by Republican armies, and some historians describe it as a genocide. Historian Francois Ferreau says it not only revealed massacre and destruction on an unprecedented scale, but also a zeal so violent that it has bestowed as its legacy much of the region's identity. The war aptly epitomizes the depth of the conflict between religious tradition and the revolutionary foundation of democracy.
Second phase of the revolutionary was the struggle between the bourgeois and the proletariat, and the September massacres. A wave of killing happened in Paris on September 2nd to the 3rd in 1792. There were other cities that were attacked in that summer in France. The fear of attack from foreign nations on Paris caused prisoners to revolt and massacre the people. Radicals called to have the prisoners killed so that they wouldn't do more harm. The mobs of National Guardsmen and Fédérés killed prisoners, and by September 6th, half the prisoners of Paris had been executed, some 1,200 to 1,400 prisoners. 233 were non-jurying Catholic priests, and the rest were common criminals. Massacres were repeated in many other cities too, and no one was ever prosecuted for the killings. There were political repercussions on the Girondins, too moderate, and later the Jacobins that were too bloodthirsty. The killings separated the supporters and the opponents of the revolution, and Louis concluded that the September massacres mark a watershed in the troubled history of the relationships between the people and the political elite in France. The Girondin political faction of 1792 to 1793 happened within the Legislative Assembly and the National Convention. They campaigned for the end of the monarchy but resisted the momentum of the revolution. There was a conflict with the Montagnards, a radical faction within the Jacobin Club, which were the bloodthirsty ones. The conflict led to the fall of the Girondinists, and there was mass execution. The beginning of the Reign of Terror, Jacques Pierre was a Brissot leader, and he proposed military strategy to dominate Western Europe and conquer the Rhineland, Poland, and Holland. They wanted to create a protective ring of satellite republics in Britain and into Italy. Thomas Paine was an American activist ally, and in Brissot and Madame Roland were executed. Jean-Marie Roland went into hiding and then committed suicide, and then Paine was arrested and imprisoned. There was a famous painting called The Death of Marat. There's a famous painting called The Death of Marat, which shows the killing of radical journalist Jean-Paul Marat, and it was painted by Charlotte Corday, who was executed also.
The Battle of Valmy was the first major victory by France on September 20th of 1792. This was the Prussian troops led by the Duke of Brunswick when they attempted to march on Paris. General Francois Kellerman and Charles Dumouriez stopped the advance near the village of Valmy, known as the War of the First Coalition. This became a huge psychological victory for France. After the battle, the National Convention formally declared the end of the monarchy in France and established the First French Republic. The First French Revolution was September 22 of 1792, and this lasted until the declaration of the First French Empire in 1804. The Edict of Fraternity was on November 19, 1792. This was when France offers to help any country wishing to overthrow their king or monarchy. Then later on was the trial of King Louis XVI. This began on December 10. On December 11, the National Convention's president, Bertrand Barry, decreed the investigation of Louis XVI. He was charged on 13 different accounts, and the verdict on the 14th and 15th of January, 1793, there was not a single vote no by the 693 deputies. On January 21st, 1793, Louis XVI is executed.
Dun dun dun!
After the execution of Louis XVI, this caused a political turmoil. From May to January, Jean-Paul Marat fought against the Girondins. He believed that they were enemies of republicanism. Marat called for violent tactics against them, but the Girondins fought back. They demanded Marat be tried before the Revolutionary Tribunal. Marat opposed arrest for several days, but was imprisoned on April 24 of 1793. Charges on him wrote calling for widespread murder as well as the suspension of the convention. Marat was then acquitted of these charges. Marat was later murdered on July 13 by Charlotte Corday when she stabbed him in his home. His death later contributed to the Reign of Terror. Charlotte Corday was executed by the guillotine for the assassination of Marat on July 17, 1793. When on trial, she said,
"I killed one to save 100,000.
After her death, the Jacobin leader had an autopsy done on her to see if she was a virgin. If she wasn't, they speculated she had a bed partner help in the assassination, but she was a virgin, in fact. The levée en masse was meaning mass uprising or mass mobilization. This was a military tactic. The Reign of Terror, which was the popular riots in Paris on September 5th, 1793 to July 28th of 1794. This was a period of violence that occurred after the onset of the revolution. The Girondins and the Jacobins, or the enemies of the revolution, had tens of thousands died, 16,594 by the guillotine, 25,000 were summary executions. The guillotine, or the national razor, was a symbol of the revolutionary cause. Executions were done to King Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, the Girondins, Philippe Égalité, and Madame Roland Antoinette Louvière. The French nobility opposed the revolution, so did the Roman Catholic Church. The clergy were employees of the state and had to pledge loyalty through the civil constitution of the clergy. The First French Republic was in a series of wars with neighboring powers, intent on stopping the revolution before it could spread. Terror's leaders would use powers for mass execution and political purges. This accelerated in June and July of 1794, called Le Grande Terreur, or the Great Terror. This led to the Thermidor reaction of several instigators were executed, including Saint Just and Robespierre. There were several counter-revolutions in Lyons. These were revolts against the National Convention from June 1793 to December of 1793. Tax riots broke out in 1789 in hopes that the Estates General would cancel the taxation privileges of the city's merchant oligarchs, so the citizens who were least able to pay wouldn't have to. Local government didn't get rid of the octroi, causing another riot. The Lyons focused on banking, commerce, and manufacturing, and a third of the population worked in the skill weaving business. Arthur Young, English writer, estimated that 20,000 people were living off charity or starving. The Jacques Imber commis were the old royalist elites, and they were against the Jean-Marie Roland, the local industrialists. They were also known as the Revolutionary Patriots. In September of 1790, working class established 32 revolutionary societies, one of them being the Central Club. They were a meeting point for delegates for the revolutionary societies. They were controlled by Rolandan factions, and then they went under the direction of Joseph Chalier. These were governed by the national dictatorial structure centered in Lyons, and was dominated by the constitutional royalists until a Rolandan, Louis Vité, got elected mayor in 1790. November of 1792, Nouvier Scholl was elected mayor. He persuaded the assembly to give an interest-free loan of $3 million francs to be divided by the citizens by proportions. The bourgeoisie hated this, but the royalists approved. In February of 1793, the Central Club called for the creation of a revolutionary tribunal. The mayor didn't like this, so he sent out troops. This started a popular insurrection, and to defuse the resigns was then re-elected. On March 14, 1793, the municipal bakery is established. This meant taxation on food. And then on April 8 of 1793, seven-man committee of public safety founded a revolutionary path. On May 4, the Central Club and the Popular Association again called for a revolutionary tribunal. This called for a committee of revolutionary surveillance and revolutionary army. It also called for a force of cash levy on the rich. And then on May 4th, the City Council voted to create a revolutionary army, and 6 million francs fund was from taxing the rich.
The law of suspects happened on September 7th, 1793. They declared the Committee of Public Safety during the Reign of Terror. The law ordered the arrest of all enemies of the revolution, and the following year it became even more strict. They introduced the idea that the subjects had to prove their innocence, and later extended the law of the 22nd parallel. On the 14th of October in 1793, Marie Antoinette was tried and executed. The trial and execution of Marie Antoinette happened by a revolutionary tribunal on October 14th, 1973. They declared her guilty of treason on October 16th. And the same day she had her hair cut off and was driven through Paris. At 12:15 that day she was executed, and her last words were, "Pardon me, sir, I meant not to do it." Her body was thrown into an unmarked grave in Madeleine Cemetery. On May 6, 1758 to July 28, 1794, a French lawyer and politician, Maximilien de Robespierre, and a member of the Estates General, the Constitute Club, and the Jacobin Club, advocated against the death penalty and the abolition of slavery. He supported equal rights, universal suffrage, and the establishment of a republic. In July of 1793, after the defeat at the Convention of the Moderate Republicans, Maximilien Robespierre, Saint Just, and George Cawthorne were added to the Committee of Public Safety. In December of 1793, the convention gained control over the committee. Robespierre was established as a virtual dictatorship. The execution of Robespierre represented a period against the committee, known as the Thermidor reaction. The committee's power faded and was de-established in 1795, creating the cult of supreme being, which was a form of deism, but there was no god. It was kind of like atheism. It intended to become the state religion of the new French Republic. The White Terror. From May to June in 1795, the White Terror was started by a group in the south of France. The companions of Jehu planned a double uprising and concede with the invasion by Great Britain. The movement was crushed by Lazar Hoche at Kilburn on July 12, 1795. Organized by Kilburn royalist forces, they targeted the Jacobins throughout France. Jacobins were attacked and often murdered. On the 8th of June in 1795, the Dauphin dies in prison, and the Comte de Provence assumes title of Louis the 17th. The French Constitution of 1795, the Constitution of the 22nd August of 1795, or the Constitution of Year 3. The new national constitution ratified by the National Convention established the Directory and effectively ended the revolution. It was the start of the ascent of Napoleon Bonaparte, the short man.
French King Henry Louis the 16th, Paris, Versailles, and something else.
Feudalism was abolished in what the fuck sorry? They're gonna come arrest you. They'll probably think you're a crack addict.
The Comte de Mirabeau.
Sorry, I was like, what is this word?
I spotted a mild Maaike.
See if she was a virgin. If she wasn't, they speculated that she had.
Let me take a selfie.
Dun 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 dun. Ah! Now look, it's a caged animal. Can't be tamed.
Give us a beauty shot. After the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy. Sorry.
French Republic.
Bless you.
16th. Nope, is that the 16th? XVI is 16, right? Okay.
Use powers for mass execution and political.